Hello everybody, welcome to PixelTunes Radio, episode 7. I am Mike.
And I'm Ed.
And you are listening to our Shoot 'em Ups episode.
This is going to be one heck of a show.
This is going to be awesome, and you guys are going to get pumped, psyched, stoked, all the above. We got some really awesome tracks that we've hand-selected, hand-picked, cherry-picked, right off the video game tree of fruit.
Some juicy selections going on here.
Juicy stuff.
So let's talk a little bit about shoot 'em ups. You don't see very many out nowadays. There's a lot of maybe indie shoot 'em ups coming out, but as far as the AAA big budget titles, no. So mainly for those of you who aren't too familiar, back in the 16 and 8-bit days, shoot 'em ups were where it was at.
Huge,
basically,
big in arcades,
all the way up until the Dreamcast.
Yeah.
So basically, you are a ship and you're moving around. The screen is scrolling by itself. Enemies are pouring in at you, shooting bullets left and right, and you have two options, or two basic missions. One is to dodge the bullets, and two is to shoot the enemies. And that's how you do it. The more enemies you shoot quicker, the less bullets come at you, and it's a game of reflexes, basically.
Yeah.
The nice thing about it is that because the stages scroll by themselves and the stages are a set length, the composers were able to really make the music shine because they weren't limited by short scenes or dramatic effects or anything like that. And a lot of music is really high energy, techno, gets you really pumped up.
Shoot 'em ups for me are one of two things. I either somehow manage to dodge a bullet or I just die. That's how I play shoot 'em ups. I usually am dead within a stage or two, and then I just give up because I just don't have the patience for those type of games. I love the music and I love the games themselves, but I can never get past, I think the only game, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that I've managed to get somewhat far in is UN Squadron. All the rest, I'm just I can't do this.
There's a lot of technique involved. And there are a couple different kinds of shoot 'em ups, too. There are those where reflexes are what's going to save your butt, and then there's the other ones like R-Type, where memorization is going to save your butt. You literally need to be in the right place at the right time, or you're going to be trapped by bullets or trapped by a cave in the level, and you're going to run into a wall.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different kinds out there. We'll kind of talk about those as we go through the podcast.
Yeah.
Speaking of reflex-based shoot 'em ups, our first title is going to be Summer Carnival 92 Rekka, which was a Famicom-only title.
Yeah, this game was technically impressive in pretty much every possible way. I mean, some of the graphical things that are going on there were amazing. Very little latency or slowdown in the game itself when you're playing through it, except for a couple examples, but it was very technically impressive for its time on the Famicom. You never saw stuff like this. The speed at which the game was moving is incredible. It's very fast. It's a very fast-paced shooter on the NES.
Yeah, one of the things that really impressed me with the game is the music. Doesn't sound like any other Nintendo music I've ever heard.
No, definitely not.
Basically, because the game came out so late in the Famicom's life, memory gets cheaper as time goes on.
True.
So what I'm figuring is, they were able to pack a lot of memory into the cartridge, which was cheaper, so that they were able to fit a lot of PCM samples into the music. So that's why you're going to hear a lot of techno shouts and synth noises that you normally don't hear out of your simple 5-channel NES Famicom music.
It also was very busy sounding too, and I've played the soundtrack for people who are not fans of chiptunes and they don't like it, and part of the reason why is because there's so much going on in the songs, and a lot of the sounds are very kind of one single note held and just sustained over a period of time, and on the hardware it kind of sounds a little warbly.
Yeah, I think you need to be a fan of both chiptune and a fan of techno.
Yeah, agreed.
In order to like it.
Yeah.
And also a fan of just the technology behind the music.
Yeah.
Because that will help you understand why this music is kind of set apart among other NES and Famicom pieces. So without further ado, here is the music from Summer Carnival 92 Rekka. This one's just simply called Rekka.
So it's a game, and the song, and the album, and everything is just called Rekka.
It's all ubiquitous. Enjoy.
welcome back. That was
Lightning Force, Quest for the Dark Star, otherwise known as Thunder Force 4 in Japan.
For a Sega Genesis game, that game has really intense, incredible music. And I'm not saying that most Sega Genesis games don't, but like we've been talking about for most of this episode so far, most of the games that you're going to hear music from for shoot-'em-ups are technically impressive, both visually and sound-wise, audibly.
Yeah. Lightning Force had kind of a very metal soundtrack, especially with the boss music. And I think the Genesis pulled that off a lot better than the Super Nintendo did.
Yeah.
Mainly because they could kind of twist those FM synths into a really distorted, synthetic version of a heavy metal guitar and really get those chords and that distortion down. Whereas with the Super Nintendo, they would have to kind of emulate a sound font into something, or they would take one guitar strum and turn it into a sample and then just attenuate the pitch up and down. It just didn't sound as good. They weren't able to really bend that note as well.
It depends too. I mean, there were some composers were really able to do some fantastic stuff on the Super Nintendo when it came to making things sound like instruments. We've talked a little bit about that, like in the Beat 'em Ups episode, where we talked about Final Fight and the synths for the instruments, like the saxophone or the trumpet sounded like a trumpet.
Right. Yep.
So I think that ultimately it really all matters who is using what and who has the familiar information for both sides of things.
Agreed.
But the guitars on games like Mega Man X, the Mega Man X games, Capcom really know how to make video games on the Super Nintendo sound like guitars for the music. So I do agree with you, though, in this particular song that we just heard, like really sharp sounding guitar, really heavy sounding.
It really captures that buzz, I
Yeah.
think, and it just that really heavy buzz that the Super Nintendo had a much more difficult time than the Genesis would.
It's brash. It's really brash sounding. It sounds like it's a real guitar, whereas when you listen to it on the Super Nintendo, it's a little more muted.
Right, it sounds a little more artificial.
Yeah, I think it just
Still
sounds
good,
a little bit more subdued, but with this, it sounds a little bit more rocking. So.
Yeah. So that was composed by Toshiharu Yamanishi. Well, he mainly composed the music for Lightning Force. There were other composers in there as well. But Yamanishi was the primary guy. He also did Thunder Force 3, Elemental Master, a couple other games for Technosoft for the Genesis. Devil's Crush for the TurboGrafx 16 and Genesis being one of my favorite titles.
Right?
That was a pinball game, actually.
Oh, really?
It had kind of shoot-'em-up elements.
Yeah.
There were enemies that you had to shoot the ball at, but it was more of a more like a adventure-based pinball game.
Yeah.
Kind of like Wizorb, if you've played that.
Pinball Dreams?
Yeah, similar to that.
Kinda, yeah,
Similar
like
to
on
that.
the
There was a
Amiga.
theme to it. But again, all very rock and roll metal with some powerful synths mixed in with it. So that's really his style.
Yeah.
A lot of darker stuff. Talking about this game kind of reminds me that shoot-'em-ups are a great graphical showcase for video game systems.
Definitely.
Especially when I remember seeing back in the day with the Genesis and Super Nintendo commercials, they'd always show scenes from shoot-'em-ups because there's a lot of action going on the screen. Thunder Force 4 particularly had just gigantic bosses that would fill up the whole screen, and they were animated, so you can show a quick flash of that on a TV, and my 13-year-old self would see this giant blue monster.
Mind blown.
You're this tiny little ship shooting at this gigantic thing with red eyes. And I'm like, whoa! I gotta play that game! I can't believe it. So, they're good commercial makers, and they're good pick up and play games too.
They are.
You don't need to really
Very easy.
sit down with the manual. You can just rent it from your local Blockbuster
Pick up
and
and
sit
play.
down and start killing the crap out of people.
Very much like beat 'em ups, yeah. Just pick up and play, start jamming on the buttons and shooting. Shoot 'em up, shoot it.
That's what it's for, shooting them up.
Shooting them up.
So we're going to be moving on to a Super Nintendo track called Super EDF, Super Earth Defense Force. This was probably one of my favorite games growing up. I was a big shoot-'em-up fan, especially on the Super Nintendo. This soundtrack was composed by Tsukasa Tawada, and he later went on to do some Pokemon games. He did Pokemon Troze, Pokemon Battle Coliseum. I just played Mike a sample of this track because he hadn't heard it before. What do you think about that bass?
Dat bass. Let me tell you. As growing up with the Super Nintendo, I didn't really have too many shooters. I mean, not a lot. So I kind of got into the whole shoot 'em up genre, I guess you could say, years later. So Ed plays me this track, and I'm like, all right, what are we gonna hear? And that bass, man, that bass solo was pretty incredible. Really impressive stuff for the Super Nintendo.
So it's got this slap bass in it. The song kind of starts off, so it's okay. It's a decent song.
Yeah.
But then it just rolls into this killer bass solo.
Yeah.
It lasts like 45 seconds.
It's crazy.
And when I was playing it, it's boss music basically. It's called Boss Attack, the name of the song. So when I would be playing the bosses in Super EDF, I would stop shooting, like literally, so I could wait until the song got to that part, just because I loved the song so much. There was a sound test in the game too, and I was able to make my own soundtrack from the sound test. But just when I was playing the game, I'm like, I gotta hear the bass solo.
Yeah.
You can't hear the beginning of that song without wanting it to roll into the bass solo.
It's funny you say that, because I would press start just to hope that the music would continue playing, and I could just listen to the track without actually having to play through the game. And when I got my fill of it, this was of course before you had MP3 players and you had CD players, and the ability to rip these songs and put them on some sort of audio format that you could take on the go or listen. So that's what I would do. I would like pause a game and just be like, all right, okay, let me get my fill, and then I'm done. So it's funny that I hear people say that about other games, so that's really funny. Yeah,
the cool thing about this music, there's actually 4 different versions of this soundtrack. So there's the Super Nintendo soundtrack. Mm-hmm. There's a version of this game that came out for the Apple iOS devices, which had its own soundtrack built in. There was an arcade version of this, which had different music. And then even the Super Famicom version of this game had different music than the Super Nintendo version.
Really?
The instrumentation was the same, but for some reason they used different percussion samples.
That's weird.
I don't know why and what made them change their mind on how to make the music, but for whatever reason, it's just... So what I would do every time I discovered there was a new soundtrack for this game is I would just go, okay, what does Boss Attack sound like? And the American Super Nintendo version has always been my favorite. It's the version I grew up with, so it's remained that way. So here we go, Boss Attack. Enjoy the bass, enjoy the fun.
Dat bass.
Dat bass.
In AD 2014, hunger was beginning. What happened?
Somebody set up us the breakfast.
We get milk.
What?
Main utensils, grab now.
It's food.
How are you, gentlemen? All your food are belong to us. You are on the way to hunger.
What you say?
You have no chance to survive. Make your time. Ha ha ha.
Now, Ziggy O's breakfast cereal of choice of lifetimes. Delicious rings of corn and sugar. Best included when poured in or on milk.
Favorite cereal? Move off shelves.
Heartily, for great justice.
Ziggios! Grab now on a market super for you, ready waiting for purchase. Somebody set you up with the Trax that you just listened to.
All your podcasts belong to us.
PixelTunes Radio.
That's us. That was zeroing, in case you guys didn't realize. So, that game is, I think, more popular as a meme than it was an actual game.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I remember after all that died down, after the all your base are belong to us inside jokes, the memes, but they weren't even called memes back then. Internet fodder. I don't know.
Yeah,
it
was just a thing.
It was a thing. It was E-Bomb's
You wouldn't
world.
understand, Mom. It's an internet thing.
Yeah, jeez. I remember playing that game afterwards, downloading it, and being like, "Oh yeah, this is that all your base are belong to us game," and listening to the music, and I was like, "Holy crap! The music is incredible in this game."
It's actually pretty good. The reason why the meme got popular is because a band called the Laziest Men on Mars actually sampled the soundtrack. And added in that all your base are belong to us.
Yeah, like all the robot talk.
That's how it got popular. So it really was based off the music being pretty decent.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting fact that the soundtrack for the game is actually responsible for the game's popularity rather than the opposite way around.
Speaking of the soundtrack, Ed played me a version of that song that was for the arcade, because I guess there was an arcade version of the same game, Zero Wing. And wow, talk about a huge difference. I mean, we've heard some pretty raunchy stuff on the Genesis as far as sound quality goes, but as we've been saying this whole time in the podcast, the right developers and programmers of this music and composers can really showcase the differences between these chipsets. And listening to the Genesis version versus the arcade version, you would think with the better hardware on the arcade, or the bigger, better hardware, you would think that the sound would be better. In a lot of games, that is the case, but in this, I would totally go with the Genesis version. I mean, the arcade version sounded very cluttered, very kind of like all over the place. It wasn't all kind of meshing together. It was like track after track kind of like interlooping with each other and, kind of merging. And when it did, it just didn't sound as prominent. I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is the arcade version sucks, man.
Yeah, actually, even though the original version of Zero Wing was on the arcade, the hardware that created the music, the YM3812, was actually released in 1985.
Oh, really?
So it's about as old as the NES.
Oh, okay. So it's
an FM
older
synth,
hardware,
but it's got some aging hardware in there.
Yeah.
So even though the YM2612 in the Genesis has a lower model number, it's actually part of a later generation of Yamaha synth chipsets.
Yeah.
So that music had been out for a while, so they ended up being able to improve it when they ported it over to the Genesis hardware. So that's why they end up with a better version of the soundtrack.
Yeah. Well, there you have it.
So we're going to be rolling into a new song.
Yay!
That new song's title is
Yay! Song title is Yay.
R Dance. Letter R.
R Dance.
Space.
Dance.
Dance.
Huh.
From Super R-Type for the Super Nintendo.
What's the R stand for?
Rockin'. That's what I like to think.
I was...
Rockin' type.
Why is it that the first word that came to mind was robot?
The robot dance is your chance to do the bump.
What?
I don't know, man. The robot dance. No, I don't really know why. I know that the name of your ship is the R9.
I got it. It makes me dance like a robot.
Perfect.
There we go.
Absolutely. I've
Horrible.
seen you dance.
Yeah.
So I can totally
Step up from Elaine.
Yes.
On
How
Seinfeld.
about...
Speaking of Seinfeld. This,
No, this wasn't the R-Type. This wasn't the Seinfeld song.
Oh. Well, then,
the Super EDF with the slap
yeah,
bass. That was the Seinfeld
Yeah,
song.
that was the Seinfeld.
That was like Seinfeld on steroids right there. It was pretty crazy.
Waiting for Kramer to walk in during that bass solo.
So during our Beat 'em Ups episode, we played a song from the same composer who did R-Type. His name is Takayushi Hayamuda, or Haya Unit, as he goes by in the credits of most of his games. And I remember the Undercover Cops song that we played by him had a very New Jack Swing style. That was actually composed after the Super R-Type soundtrack was.
Right.
But, the Super R-Type soundtrack is definitely like total New Jack Swing.
Yeah.
It's like Bobby Brown, Belle Biv DeVoe,
Yep.
excessive uses of orchestra hits and like swing bass kind of stuff.
Love it.
It's a good track.
Yeah, and you listen to the songs that came out of this age in video games, and that's one thing that you kind of got to note is video game music at that time was composed based on music that was out at that time.
Yeah.
You don't have that as much nowadays. I mean, yeah, you'll have, the commercials for a lot of games have like awful Skrillex-based
I was just going to say, there's a lot of dubstep in. But there are...
But it's always in the commercials. It's never in the games.
That's because you don't play a lot of mobile games.
Yeah.
I play a lot of like iPad and Android games, and there are a lot of games that have lots of dubstep in them. Yeah, it's definitely dubstep, EDM.
Yep.
But you don't find that too much on like one game on a console that comes to mind is Metal Storm Apocalypse.
Yeah.
That had some dubstep in it.
Okay.
But other than that, you don't hear a lot of wibbles and wobbles and songs.
Yeah.
For
I'm okay with that though. I'm not the biggest fan of dubstep.
I enjoy that kind of music, so it sticks out to me when I hear it. But yeah, it's mostly mobile games that jump on that dubstep bandwagon. I guess it's more their demographic.
Yeah.
But we're kind of diverging from that.
I mean, melodies. Melodies are less important in newer music than they were for...
the music isn't as catchy as it used to be.
Right,
that's
right.
For sure.
And I think pop music, especially back then, was more melody-driven than newer music nowadays.
Yes.
But, as you said, but I digress.
So Super R-Type was a game that I owned as a kid. I never beat it.
Nope.
Ever.
Never.
It's rough. It's one of those, it's a game you have to memorize.
Agreed.
Even if you don't know where to be at what time, you're screwed.
Yeah.
And then there are power-ups that would come down that you could get, but you might want to stick with the power-up you already have, and it doesn't let you know. Usually you're used to in a game where if there's a power-up, it's generally the developer saying, hey, you should grab this weapon because it's going to help you beat this boss. But then sometimes what you got is what you should stick with.
That's why I always preferred Gradius.
Yeah.
To R-Type. I don't know. I liked R-Type, but Gradius I liked knowing what I was getting ahead of time.
Yes.
And then being able to work my way up the chain.
The manual power-up system was fantastic.
Loved it.
Unfortunately, because Gradius slowed down so much.
True.
I mean, it was almost a cheat code for the most part. Once you get those like 5 options and the ripple effect laser,
that's it.
And
forget it.
It's like chugging along at 2 frames per second.
Yeah.
And so it makes it a little bit easier than it could have been.
Slower, yeah.
But anyways, so getting back to R-Type, this is by Takushi Hayamuda. The name of the song is R-Dance. And like I said,
Make
Jack
sure,
Swing.
Yeah. Make sure you dance like a robot to this.
And begin.
Thanks for joining us again. That was Under Defeat, and the track was called Go on a Mission. Very generic sounding track as far as the title, but man, that was a really good song. And I've never played that game, but you actually that was your pick.
Yeah, originally the game came out, well, it was an arcade game based on the Naomi hardware, which was their arcade version of the Dreamcast.
Right.
So then it came out on Dreamcast after that. The game was a vertically oriented game, so it was one of those shooters where they would turn the monitor sideways in the arcade cabinet.
That's cool.
It later came out for the Xbox 360 as Under Defeat HD, and what they did was they expanded the screen so that it fit. You would still be scrolling upwards,
right,
but it was now a widescreen. It would fill the entire screen, which I love because I guess one of my pet peeves is playing a vertically oriented shoot 'em up on a horizontally laid screen.
Yeah.
When I was younger, when I had built my first computer, I was working for a major computer store, so I got decent discounts. I actually bought, specifically for this reason, a monitor that you could switch. You could rotate
cool.
the monitor on its stand.
Yeah.
So that when I wanted to play like an arcade shooter in MAME, or if I wanted to hook my Dreamcast up, I could rotate the screen and then rotate it in the emulator or in the Dreamcast, so I could actually play full size on a vertical screen like in the arcade. So once that monitor crapped out on me, I didn't have that ability anymore because they don't really make those anymore except for like professional level graphic designers and stuff. So I kind of had to just deal with nowadays with HD TVs that are a lot bigger, I don't have to worry about that because, the screen's still pretty big and it's good resolution. So,
and especially since touchscreens are becoming more and more prominent, you have less to worry about as far as that goes. A lot of screens now have accelerometers built into them.
Yes.
So you turn the screen and it turns with you.
Yes, exactly. This track was composed by Shinji Hoso. You might be familiar with his name. If you're not familiar with his name, you might also recognize him by the name Sampling Masters Mega. Well, the Sampling Masters team was, or still is, I know. Remember when we were talking about Zuntata a couple episodes ago? It's kind of like, this is Namco's in-house composer group.
Right.
And they did mostly techno songs.
Yeah.
So they worked a little bit on Tekken. Shinji Hoso, or Mega as he was called back then, started off writing on the Ridge Racer soundtrack. And I credit the Ridge Racer soundtrack for getting me into electronic music. That soundtrack was absolutely amazing. It was just high energy, balls to the wall techno, and it was great. I started seeking out other songs that sounded like Ridge Racer
it's Ridge Racer.
Yeah, it was superb stuff. So then I slowly, as time went on, started learning about the Sampling Masters, and they actually have their own CDs that come out with not video game music, but kind of in the vein of what they compose for the other Namco games. So Hoso's been doing work since then. He's been going on forever. His latest composition, he's got a couple pieces in the Ridge Racer Slipstream game, which is for iPad or iOS and Android. So he's got a couple tracks in there.
So again, it's Ridge Racer.
So he's done the original Ridge Racer, which came out when the PlayStation very first came out, and he's still doing Ridge Racer soundtracks now.
Ridge Racer! Come on, you should have seen where I was going with that.
Ridge Racer! Yeah, that's a great game. It's totally awesome. So, yeah, Shinji Hoso's the man.
Totes the best!
Totes!
So our next track is from a game called Hyper Zone, and this one is a little bit more subdued, I think, just because it's the credits, and that's the actual name of the song, Credits.
Yes.
This is a Super Nintendo track composed by Jun Ishikawa.
Yeah, he did a lot of Kirby soundtracks.
Did he really?
Most of the Kirby soundtracks, actually. He worked for HAL Laboratories. The thing that impresses me the most about the soundtrack is that it was a launch title for the Super Nintendo.
That is true.
I think it was a launch title in Japan. It might not have been a launch title in the US. But anyways, it came out extremely close to the launch of the Super Nintendo. Yeah. And it's not a traditional shooter in the fact that you're scrolling from side to side. You're actually moving into the screen. It's, if you want to imagine an F-Zero track below you and an F-Zero track above you, and you're flying like a sandwich in between them, then...
I do love sandwiches.
It's an F-Zero sandwich.
Yeah,
it's like a Jill sandwich. So, yeah, you're flying into the screen, the enemies are coming toward you, and you're flying around and shooting. So that was the first home console game where you were really kind of in a 3D space
Right.
and moving in on 3 axes and trying to kill the bad guys.
And yeah.
The soundtrack was amazing. I picked the ending soundtrack because even though the stage soundtracks are really, really good, they're very short.
True.
So the end credits kind of has a little bit of everything and sort of starts off with a softer synth and then gets into kind of more rock and stuff. And you were commenting on the lead synth.
Yeah, the Hammond organs sound really incredible on this song. They're really good stuff. And to go back to Under Defeat as well, because I know we were talking about Under Defeat, the melodies in there, especially for the guitar work is excellent on that song. And I really wish they brought it up a little bit as far as the levels go, because they had some really good stuff in there.
Yeah. The production quality from Namco's team has always been top-notch. It's just pro-level work.
Right.
They always really concentrated on their music. They're one of the developers that really, I think, got the fact that soundtracks will make you play a game more.
Yeah, no, that's true. And even to this day, I mean, some of the games that Namco comes out with still have really very strong, very amazing soundtracks. I mean, like Project X Zone that just came out for the 3DS. But regardless, getting back to Hyperzone, so Jun Ishikawa. What do we know about Jun Ishikawa?
I already told you I did the Kirby soundtracks.
No, I mean,
what else do you want to know about?
What do we know about the man?
His favorite color is blue.
All right, that's what I wanted to know. I mean, jeez, come on, Ed. You know, I put you in charge of this stuff. You gotta stay on top of this. You know what, people? Just listen to the track. This Hyperzone.
God.
Credits.
Jeez.
Go listen to it.
Go listen. Have fun.
Man, I was so close. Okay, one more try. If I could just stay awake.
Shoot 'em ups, shmups, shooters. Regardless of what you call them, one fact remains. These games are hard as hell. That's why we've developed Shmup Helper. Shmup Helper is a simple kit containing everything you need to beat your shoot 'em up. Here's what's inside.
4 shots of espresso!
3 tablets of Ritalin!
Headgear to pry your eyelids open!
And lastly, a large bag of powdered controlled substances. Okay, gamer guy, how do you feel? Ready to take on the Bido Empire?
Oh, my eyelids are like sandpaper. My heart feels explodey, and I think I just saw the ghost of Koji Kondo.
That means it's working. So gamers, don't walk, run to the store and grab the shoot 'em up, pick me up, Shmup Helper. Shmup Helper is not responsible for death, injury, or spontaneous orgasm. Use as directed. In the case of death, please call a funeral home immediately. Illegal in every state except Colorado. Available at CSV, Tide Aid, and Gnome Depot. Welcome back. That was UN Squadron for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
And I love this game. This is my favorite shooter of all time.
I think it's your only favorite shooter.
Yeah, like I said before, I'm not that big into shooters, but UN Squadron, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was because it was made by Capcom, and I was a total Capcom freak back then, so pretty much anything they put out, I was like, gimme!
Because Mike and I will usually talk about shooters, and I'll be like, yeah, this game did this, and that game did that. He'll be like, UN Squadron did this.
Yeah.
And we'll move on to a different topic, and I'll be like, yeah, dude, totally, like our type. And he'll be like,
yeah,
UN Squadron did this.
Yeah. No, that's pretty
like
much
his only point of reference.
That's every conversation that I've ever had with anybody about shooters. So when it came down to us picking shooters for, shoot 'em up songs, I was like, UN Squadron's going to be on the list, right?
I was going to eat my hat if you didn't pick a UN Squadron song.
Yeah.
So my hats are gross.
Rest of the tracks to come up with on my half were not difficult. I would more say just troublesome, because I was like, duh, what shooters have I played?
Yeah.
Duh.
Well, the good thing is that the soundtracks are available without actually having to play the games. So,
but I will say that all the games that I picked songs from, I did play. Or own or play now.
That's good.
Yeah, so that's good stuff. But yeah, I really like that song. It's very Capcom. That's the best way for me to put it.
Absolutely, and that's because the composers are very Capcom.
Very
composers.
Capcom, yeah.
So, Mari Yamaguchi and Yoshihiro Sakaguchi are credited for writing this song. This soundtrack, actually.
They've done everything pretty much for Capcom. I mean, Final Fight 1, Final Fight 2...
Mega Man, Mega Man 5,
yep,
Super Ghouls and Ghosts,
Street Fighter,
the TurboGrafx 16 version of Street Fighter Championship Edition, Mari Yamaguchi worked on.
Yeah.
And she also did some work for Mega Man 10. Mm-hmm. Mega Man 10 and 9, was that the other one that came out recently?
Yeah.
They gathered lots of the composers from the original Mega Mans, and they each contributed tracks. Yeah, it was a really nice throwback kind of thing.
Definitely, yeah.
Especially that they were done in the style of the Nintendo, but weren't done on the Nintendo, so the composers could kind of use a little artistic freedom to make the songs. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, they were all done with FamiTracker, if I recall.
Oh, were they? I thought that they were done outside. I thought they just used Nintendo sound fonts, but then...
I don't know, maybe. I could have sworn I read that they were done by FamiTracker.
You might be right. Or some of the artists might have used it in some...
You know what? Let's let our audience decide this. Audience, what happened with Mega Man 9? Do our research for us and tell us the truth, because we need to know.
In case you're not familiar with what FamiTracker is, it's a program that you can download for Windows, and you can actually compose music that you can export into a file type that will be playable on a real Nintendo Entertainment System or a Famicom.
Yeah.
So that would be true chiptune NES styles right there.
Yeah.
As opposed to using like a MIDI sequencer
right.
and just getting a Nintendo sound font where your synths would sound like the Nintendo but wouldn't actually be running on Nintendo hardware. So that's the differences we're talking about here. Yeah. Some might be interested to know that Yoshihiro Sakaguchi, one of the composers from UN Squadron, is known as Yuki-chan's Papa, who his name always popped up during the credits for Mega Man and Commando, and I remember that name kind of specifically because it's just, I don't know, he's probably got a daughter or a son named Yuki. Yeah. Yuki-chan. Cute Yuki. Papa. So
Yeah.
One of those nicknames, those pseudonyms that we talked about.
If I was a Japanese composer for video games, my name would be like Yukihama-chan, Papa Bun Bun,
Ochibara.
Ochinochi.
Hamburger.
Yeah. that would be my name. Yeah. So there
Nobody
you have
would
it.
remember you.
No. I'd be like one of those composers would be like, hey, you remember that guy that did that song?
Trying to Google that name?
Yeah.
I mean,
No.
spelling just wouldn't even work out. So before we move on to our next track, I wanted to give a shout out to our friends over at Retro Obscura.
What?
They have an amazing podcast. They talk about everything. They do video games, but then they also do any sort of geek fandom from the 80s and 90s.
So like toys? Can I hear about toys?
I think you can hear about toys, movies.
Can I hear about wrestling?
You can hear about polyester shorts. No, not really.
That's
I'm
kind
just
of
kidding.
wrestling. No, not at all. Okay,
Polyester
so no.
sounds more spandex.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to any podcast where they talk about wrestling.
Polyester is
Maybe
baseball.
we can get them to talk about wrestling.
Yeah. No. Well, I'm
Baseball?
not a big wrestling
Polyester
fan.
and baseball? Is that a thing?
I think so. I think that's what they wear for the uniforms, if I recall.
I've never played baseball
I don't know.
professionally.
Professional. I've never been a professional baseball player.
I played for the Yankees, but they didn't actually pay me. So.
You know, I played on the sidelines in the stands watching a game. You know.
Right.
So yeah, big shout out to them.
Yeah, they're good dudes. So, we're going to move on to Dangun Feverone.
So tell me about this game that sounds like a disease.
It's a disco disease. I'll give you that much. This game, it's a vertical shooter put out by Cave, who is synonymous with shooters.
Yeah.
Cave makes dozens and dozens of them, and it's got a disco theme to it. So you gain fever points, and the soundtrack is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, and it's not at all chiptunes either.
No.
It's all, for the most part, live instruments. I mean, especially the guitars.
Right. Fortunately, I was able to track down the actual original soundtrack for the song instead of having to take it out of the game's code, because it's a streamed soundtrack, so when you try to rip it out of the game, it sounds really low quality. So I was able to track down the actual CD and get the music from there, which is good, because it's this catchy disco soundtrack that really never leaves your head once you start playing it. I travel all over the place with my family in the car. I play a lot of video game songs, and this is the one where my toddler and my 8-year-old in the back seat will start bopping along to this soundtrack, because it's just so much fun. You really can't stop yourself from nodding your head while you're listening to it.
I'm envious that you can do that with your family. If I try to get my girlfriend to listen to video game music, it better not be chiptune.
You gotta sneak it in there.
Yeah.
Or you can go to like OC Remix
Like
and download some remix versions of
Like a
video
secret-
game songs that sound like maybe a swing version of Mega Man 2, or a techno version of
that
Super
usually
Mario
works.
Brothers.
Classical.
Because
or
then you
whatever,
just don't
jazz.
mention it. And she's like, la la la. I'm like, wait a second, is
Yeah.
this Commando?
Yeah.
And then you'll get kicked out of the car.
Yeah, or the best is playing like real rock songs. Like I'll put on Offspring, like some of the tracks from Crazy Taxi.
Oh yeah, that's
and
a
she's
good way
like,
to fake
oh
it.
man, I love this song. And I'd be like, oh really? You like Crazy Taxi soundtrack?
Let's go make some crazy money.
Yeah. So that's
I don't
what
know.
you guys do.
Either my wife puts up with it, or she really actually likes it. But I can't tell with her.
I'm
So.
gonna go with the prior
Yeah,
of the two.
yeah. I hope she likes it.
Ladies don't like video game music. Who are you kidding?
No way. Anyways,
Now that we've offended all our female listeners,
Come on.
ladies.
come on, we can't offend female listeners. They don't
They're-
exist.
Oh boy.
So we're getting back onto track with Dangun Feveron by Ryuichi Ibuki and Nanpei Misawa. Enjoy. welcome back. That was Omega 5. That was a downloadable only game for the Xbox 360.
Omega 5. Yes, this was a good game. It was a lot of fun. It was, correct me if I'm wrong, a twin-stick shooter, if I recall. You get 3 different weapons that you can choose from. Really hard game, but it was an awesome throwback, and it did come out relatively, it was one of those games that Natsume put out in a market where literally there was no way that they were going to be able to put stuff like this on disc,
Yeah, exactly. It was one of the first downloadable games, one of the first games I ever played when I first got my Xbox 360. And it's damn hard, man.
It is.
I've never beat it.
Beat it once, it is pretty difficult. One really cool thing about the game is you can, if you do beat it, you unlock the graphics to change it into Genesis-themed graphics.
Oh, okay. Because I was looking for the soundtrack to this to get the music for it, and there are like demakes of the songs where they're more in like a Genesis FM synth style.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
I haven't heard the Genesis tracks. I've only seen the filters that they put on. Really makes the game not look very playable.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like it puts a very muffled filter on the graphics.
Oh, so it doesn't actually change the sprites, it just puts a filter.
It almost like puts a filter, I would say. I don't think it actually changes the sprites to like
I'm a big fan of that
2D.
technique.
Yeah, no, it looks very muddy looking. Hirooki Iwatsuki composed a lot of tracks for Natsume, composed for Ninja Gaiden Shadow, Shatterhand, most of the Power Rangers games for like the Super Nintendo, Power Rangers the movie. Also did some other really cool tracks for like Gundam Wing, Endless Duel, and Omega 5, of course, as you know. And even Half Minute Hero he did some work on. So he is all over the place, specifically with Natsume.
Yeah, really good stuff. I mean, I like the song too.
Yeah. He's often paired with Iku Mizutani and, of course, one of our favorites, Kinyo Yamashita.
Who
did Castlevania, but also worked on Pocky and Rocky, Pocky and Rocky 2.
Just Pocky and Rocky 2.
Actually, just
Pocky
and Rocky 2. And then, of course, Wild Guns, Ninja Warriors. I mean, all those sort of games.
Yeah. So we're going to go into our next track, which is going to be our outro track. I know we don't do outro tracks.
No, not really.
But this one is from Section Z. I originally posted a question on our PixelTunes Facebook account asking what people's favorite shooters were.
Wait, PixelTunes Radio has a Facebook account?
You can find our Facebook account at www.facebook.com/PixelTunesRadio.
Oh man, but you know what? I don't have Facebook.
Do you have Twitter?
I do.
You can find us at PixelTunes Radio on Twitter.
Oh, so I just search for the handle at PixelTunes Radio. Wow.
Absolutely.
You've made it so easy. So, man, you know what? I want to cover all my bases. Do you guys have a visual thing that I can look at while I listen to your podcast?
Are you familiar with YouTube?
I am. You know what?
You can type in PixelTunes Radio on YouTube and you can see a slideshow of game covers while you listen to our phenomenal podcast.
Oh man, you know what? You guys have just made it so easy for me.
We aim to please, man.
And when I say you, I say me.
At PixelTunes Radio, our listeners come first.
Me make it so easy for me.
Well, you did the YouTube stream and I did the rest, so...
I did. So again, thanks, Greg, for suggesting Section Z. That'll be our outro track.
Yeah, I wasn't too familiar with Section Z. I played it a long time ago, and I remember it being really good. But the
NES
soundtrack,
game?
it was a very old NES game. Actually.
Yeah.
It was from '87, so a couple years after the NES came out in the US.
It came out.
But I had completely forgotten what the soundtrack sounds like, and after I played it, it all came back to me. And it's just really cool, kind of minimalistic, jazzy tune that I really enjoyed, so we're going to use that as the outro soundtrack. It was written by Tamayo Kawamoto. He's done a lot of stuff for Capcom and a whole bunch of other companies.
Section Z was a Capcom game, right?
Section C was one of the original Capcom games. It
Yeah.
was that one of the. It was
With
old
the
enough to
borders.
have the laser border around the sides.
Yep. Very similar to the first Mega Man, Gunsmoke, those type of games.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is Section Z. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Please like us and rate us on iTunes, because we like iTunes followers as well as our Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We should make a LinkedIn account just to cover all the bases.
God, man.
LinkedIn,
Just
PixelTunes Radio.
Go do stuff with PixelTunes Radio. That sounds terrible. Anyways, enjoy this track, and again, we will see you in 2 weeks.
Peace out, brothers and sisters.
Bye.